Good evening, everyone, or afternoon. It's still afternoon. And you may be wondering why I've got a map. Well, Russia has invaded Ukraine, which, yeah, not good. So, could it lead to a third world war? Oh, I actually forgot to include Belarus. And honestly, that's an interesting question. Because there's some very important factors to think about. Does Russia really, really want a war, number one? And how many of their potential allies could they get on their side? Because Russia, I'm mostly just going to fully include France and Turkey for the sake of argument because they're officially listed as NATO members. And France is EU. Actually, I think Austria is EU too. And where? So it's pretty clear that a state of war exists between Russia and the Ukraine. How likely is it for this map to how likely is it for this conflict to actually spiral into a potential world war? Well, I should probably also include Belarus in that. I think it's slightly naive to think that Putin and his foreign policy is to stop with the Ukraine and turning it into a puppet state, effectively like he's done to Belarus. Because it's not hard to imagine that he decides to go through and continue on and take out Moldova and reestablish effectively the easternmost part of the Soviet Union. Just consider fully integrate them. Certainly improve the defensibility of Russia's heartland. So from a strategic point, it actually makes sense that Russia would want to keep going. And also, they've got regions in here that are vital to their military as well as maybe influencing politically Georgia and Armenia. And if Armenia decides to get involved, well, Azerbaijan is certainly going to, especially considering they literally had a war last year. Or was it last year or 2020? My bet was it was going to be some foolishness down here in this gigantic mess. Now, Ukraine isn't in NATO. But they are in a quasi-alliance with Latvia. Or, not Latvia, that's Lithuania. Sorry, this is Latvia. With Lithuania and Poland, both of whom are NATO members. I don't think it's outside of the question that Putin would see any involvement where Polish troops or Lithuanian troops or both, help to defend the Ukraine as an effective declaration of war and decides to push through there and go for them. The second that happens, both are also EU member states, so you get all of NATO and all of the European Union. Yeah. And That's not a good thing. I'm going to highlight Greenland, even though technically they can avoid it if they want to, but they're legally part of Denmark. Yeah. And that would just be the European theater, because, hey, while everybody's focused on Ukraine, what if China happens to say, we want Taiwan? Which, by the way, the United States has a legal obligation to defend. Well, I don't think it's outside of the question that China would probably ask for North Korea's assistance, or North Korea would decide, now's the time to unify Korea under my flag. It's very likely we would, get help from our allies over in the East, which potentially also includes India, Vietnam. Now, India and Pakistan have terrible relations with each other. Pakistan would probably join its Chinese ally. And let's be honest, Iran probably could get called. I think Israel would also lend support. So effectively, this could be where it would start after spiraling out of control. That's if things don't calm down really quickly. Because, I'm going to be honest, sanctions are not going to stop Russia. Because Russia has something that Europe desperately needs, and that's natural gas. Basically, Russia is going to hold energy needs over the heads of Europe and say, look, you want to power your cities, you want to not have blackouts? Yeah, let us have Ukraine. And they can say, no, we're going to sanction you. Russia's going to say, okay, enjoy no power. And they're going to take Ukraine. Well, and we've learned that in the lead up to the Second World War, appeasement, or basically just letting them have that thing, whatever crazy, mad dictator asks for, doesn't really stop that crazy, mad dictator. And acting like Russia absolutely needs to trade. They've got one of their effective allies and trading partners with a neighbor. Yeah, the majority of Russia's people are over here, and, well, these are the two land borders they share with China, neither of which are very close. This one's closer, but still, they're both across the Urals. But it's not inconceivable that, and of course China's manufacturing base is the parts over here, it's not inconceivable that they could just fire up the Trans-Siberian Railroad and expand it, and, well, they're going to be supplied. They don't need ships to get manufactured goods, and China's going to be more than willing to help Russia out if Russia's will play along with China going and getting Taiwan. That's, like I said, not completely out of the question. So, yeah. This is definitely something that I'm going to be watching. I don't think it will spiral into a global conflict, but I also don't think it's that crazy to think that it could. And why do I say that? Well, Russia has a very, very specific history. See, Russia got to be as big as it is because the people who were in the core of Russian territory, they wanted access to the sea for better trade. So they discovered archangels up here, then the Baltic, St. Petersburg, Then they found the Caspian, but that's kind of not a good trade. They found the Black Sea, which is decent, but both the Baltic and the Black have this problem that they've got very narrow choke points that make it very difficult to trade through, from these two locations. And the problem with Archangels is it freezes over in the winter. So you've only got a very short amount of time that you can trade out of here. So they expanded out this direction. And the reason why they have this panhandle is because they wanted a warm water port. And Vladivostok, well, unfortunately, it doesn't fit that bill. And so Russia has its problems that they don't have a warm water port except for Sochi, and Sochi has a problem. Technically, the Russians were for a long time leasing Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula, though that's no longer a thing now that Russia has occupied Crimea. And even with Sochi, Sevastopol, they both have the same problem that, well, a NATO member and prospective European Union member controls the Bosporus and Dardanelles, which allow access to the Mediterranean, which does have some lucrative trading. But to get out of the Mediterranean, you've got one NATO member in Spain and another country that actually is somewhat interested in joining NATO in Morocco. Now, also, yeah, Gibraltar is part of the UK, so, yeah. And if you want to go out the other direction, well, you've got to go through Egypt. And Egypt is one of those weird nations that is not really interested in... Egypt is closer to NATO in the West than a lot of countries in this part of the world. Excluding Israel, of course. Though there are some very interesting situations if we look back to history. France and Germany, for example, getting along. That's a little unusual. Germany and Poland getting along. Very unusual. Turkey and Greece getting along. Again, extremely unusual. Vietnam is technically a U.S. ally. And also China constantly tries to invade Vietnam, so it makes sense that Vietnam would not be interested in that. But would it be a winnable war for either side? The answer is I don't think so. Because China and Russia are basically two countries that are impossible to invade. Because Russia can just keep retreating and set up defensive positions in the Urals. And China, well, China has 1 billion people. And yeah, that's not exactly a case of easy to get in. But here's the thing. Russia and China can't really defeat, at least in terms of conquering and saying, surrender now. It would be a case of effectively World War I all over again. Which side can outlast the other? Because if we look at... If we clear the map and look at where the First World War was, and we're going to focus mostly in Europe because that's what it was. It was Germany, the Austrian Empire, which was really unusual because Serbia was actually part of the Allies. Russia and its empire, I believe Romania joined the Allies. I forget about Bulgaria. The Ottomans and the Greeks were on opposite sides. The Ottomans controlled this stuff. These were actually part of the Russian Empire, which also included this stuff. Forget whether Mongolia was included. I won't include them. Of course, and you also had the Western Allies, which included the Benelux nations as well. And we'll throw in the U.S. and obviously the Australians and New Zealanders. Japan also was part of the Allies, but outside of Europe, it was, yeah, for being a global war, a massive, disproportionate amount of the conflict. Poland was split by the Russian Empire and the Germans. And also, the map was a lot different. Flip it to the Second World War, and things are a lot different. Italy flipped sides. Japan, Soviet Union, China was ostensibly part of the Allies. Korea didn't really exist. It was occupied completely by Japan. Middle East actually sat this one out for the most part. Norway and Sweden were both officially neutral. Denmark was that. Spain was neutral. Portugal joined in. Greece, Albania, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria was weirdly Axis. Austria had been absorbed, along with Czechoslovakia, Hungary, technically. And yeah, this one had a lot more fighting involved. And I'm not even counting all the colonies and all of that. So for the situation to, well, effectively be almost entirely flipped, and also a lot more nations also being involved, this would much more likely No, wait, Romania and Bulgaria are both European Union members. Sorry about that. Yeah. This would be a lot rougher. Because if it were, Europe would be obviously a very massive front right in the Ukraine. In Belarus, the Baltic nations, Finland would probably have a front. There'd be a front on the Indian subcontinent and in the Himalayas. And there'd probably be separatist action in East Turkestan and Tibet. You would have certainly a Chinese front somewhere and fronts way over here, basically a Pacific theater of the war. So you'd have Europe, and it would be interesting to see if any other potential conflicts got spilled over. For example, there's a bit of a problem in just gonna throw this in here. Conflict in this region because Ethiopia is building a dam on the Nile that Sudan and Egypt are not super pleased about, Egypt in particular. That could be a potential conflict zone. Oh, I forgot to include that. There's a potential conflict here because Venezuela claims most of its bordering. I want to say it's Suriname. Argentina could get involved if they decide to truly claim the Falklands, which that would be interesting. Whoops, forgot about that. And then what would happen in Central Asia and the Middle East, which seems relatively peaceful, but there could be conflicts between Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. That would be an interesting conflict zone. And potential belligerence in the Middle East over Israel. You could also potentially see Bolivia be weird about a coastline as well. But this is a very interesting geopolitical situation going on, and one that I think everybody is hoping doesn't spiral completely out of control. But it's definitely something that I'm paying a ton of attention to. I mean, as it is, oil has spiked to, I want to say it hit, I think it hit $100 a barrel yesterday, and the longer the conflict lasts, the higher prices are going to go. So if you dislike inflation, yeah, you're not going to be enjoying things for a little bit. And that's not counting all the problems going on with the freedom convoys in Canada and the United States, where Canada is starting to act like a tyranny regarding protesters, and I'm not sure things are going to get any better here in US of A land, in America. I'm not sure things are going to get better. I hope to God this doesn't spiral into a world war. But I am concerned that it will. So, anyway, thank you all for watching. Have a very nice day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.